the largest public charging stations I have ever seen. There are over 100 level 2 charging stations behind me, not to mention some DC fast charging going on over there with one of the smallest EVs I've driven in quite some time that rather unfortunately is not coming to North America anytime soon. This is the new Hyundai Inster, also known as the Casper Electric here in South Korea. It is their smallest and most affordable electric car with an MSRP, if you translated it to American dollars, that would be under $21,000. The range, that's nothing stellar. We're talking likely under 200 miles on the EPA scale, but talk about affordable. And there's a lot to love about the Casper and the Inster, because unlike other small vehicles from some car companies I could mention, Hyundai does not delete that many features to get the Casper over an Ioniq 5. We still have a lot of the same tech going on inside that you find in the bigger and more expensive Hyundais. Design-wise, this doesn't share much with any other Hyundai sold in North America. I'll be calling this the Inster because that's the more popular name worldwide, but again, this particular model is actually the Casper Electric since we're down here in South Korea. We have pixel LED elements that kind of tie this in with the rest of Hyundai's design language. Round DRLs below with LED headlights. We find the flush mount Hyundai logo right there. And like other Hyundai electric vehicles in South Korea, we actually have a CCS charge connector down here, not the Menkes style connector we find in Europe and the rest of the world. And that is kind of interesting because, of course, there's no such thing as level 1 120 volt charging in South Korea, but no three-phase charging either. We have the radar sensor there, 360-degree camera system because, again, lots of active safety and driver assistance tech is standard on here, like we find in other Hyundai models. Active arrow shutters below. And the proportions and size of this takes some getting used to because this is quite a bit smaller than the smallest Hyundai sold in the US, but it is about 7 inches longer than a Fiat 500e. And that gives us actual usable back seats back here. And of course, 4 doors, kind of a little happy logo right there. We'll take a look at the interior in just a bit. Unfortunately, this one has an all-black interior, which does mean that it can be a little bit difficult to film. This is one of the upper-level trims, so we have the optional wheel and tire package on this one, 205 45 R17s. These are not the biggest wheels and tires, but then again, this is not the biggest vehicle. Kind of surprising for a city runabout, we also have roof rails, kind of a nice touch there. And if we move out to the back, we find the same pixel LED theme that we found up front, but these are not the turn signals. Those are actually located down here in these little round elements below. You can see on the back, we have the little Casper logo right there, big flush mount Hyundai logo, and a rear window wiper. Unlike the Ioniq 5, 6, and 9, but much like the Kona EV, there's just one motor and it's hanging out under the hood here. You have your choice of 95 horsepower or 113 horsepower, depending on the version you get. There are 2 different battery packs under the body, 42 kilowatt hours or 49 kilowatt hours in gross capacity. The usable capacity is obviously a little bit lower. According to Hyundai, this is rated for up to 229 miles of range, but that is on the overly optimistic WLTP scale. If this were to be EPA rated, I suspect it would be somewhere around 180 miles of range for the longest range variant. Although, interestingly, Hyundai has borrowed a lot of the EV tech from their larger and more expensive EVs. For instance, this does not use the less expensive LFP cells that we find in many inexpensive EVs around the world. This actually uses basically the same NMC cells that we find in other Hyundai vehicles, of course, shrunken down for the Inster here. We also have an 11 kilowatt onboard AC charger. They basically borrowed that out of their other EVs as well. That's an interesting twist because even though we have a fairly small battery, if you have access to, say, a level 2 charger right like that one there, you could completely charge this battery from empty in under 5 hours. And likely thanks to the NMC cells, if you want to DC fast charge it at, say, that DC fast charge station right over there, going 10% to 80% would take just 30 minutes, regardless of the battery pack you chose. Since it's 28 degrees outside and my fingers are starting to freeze off, let's talk about the interior, starting with the seating position. As you saw on the outside, the Inster has a very boxy look, very, very upright. And indeed it is. Just check out the amount of headroom that I have here. There is a ton of room above my head. This seat is all the way down, but if you for some reason wanted to drive this like it was a bigger SUV, I guess you could manually move this seat actually really a shocking amount up. Actually, this is at its highest height position, and I still have maybe about 3 inches of headroom left. There's a lot more room in here than you might suspect. And I think some of that has to do with the already practical packaging of the regular Casper that would be the gasoline version of this vehicle, and the fact that when Hyundai converted this into an EV, they did make a lot of structural changes to the core of the vehicle in order to support the battery pack and the electric motor and not lose a lot of practicality inside. And that's not what we used to see in so-called compliance cars from some time ago. Now, Hyundai still thinks this is not quite right for the North American market. We have no idea whether it would crash test well in the US or not, but it's not far off of the Hyundai Venue in terms of size. Practicality, though, I think this might actually be a little bit better. Over this day of mixed driving that I've been spending out here in Seoul, I found the seats to be pretty decent. We don't have any form of adjustable lumbar support or anything like that. Obviously, no powered seats, but we do have a fold flat front passenger seat that I will show you in a bit. I think that's a really cool practical touch that I wish we would see in more small vehicles in the US. Rear seat roominess is logically going to depend on where the front seats are located. This seat, however, is all the way back in its tracks. It's as upright as the driver's seat that was adjusted for me. And as you can see, we have a reasonable amount of legroom left. Now, that doesn't come for free. That obviously comes at the expense of the cargo area in the back, which you'll see is pretty tiny in a bit. But an optional feature that I appreciate is that you can slide the second row seats forward and backward to help apportion the space a bit more equitably. Now, one of the reasons that we seem to have more legroom in here than you might suspect is how low to the ground these seat bottom cushions are. That really means you have kind of a legs in your chest thing going on here, but on the other hand, I have maybe about 2 inches of headroom left. The rear seats also have a pretty aggressive recline to them. Let's see if I can actually recline them with my camera bag in the back. Maybe, you know. It's actually pretty comfortable. As far as small cars go, this is actually one of the most comfortable small cars I have been in quite some time. On the downside, Hyundai is not trying to stuff a 5th seat belt in here, so this is a strict 4-seat vehicle only. We do get latch anchors back here for the outboard seating positions, and you know, you might actually be able to squeeze a child seat behind me driving the car. But since I prefer numbers to vibes, let's actually see how that would sort out here. So 11 inches from that seat bottom cushion up, and then we're gonna need at least 28 inches to put a rear-facing child seat, and hey presto, we actually have 30 in here. Logically, again, that's going to depend on where that front seat is positioned. If we're talking about this seat over here, and I make that same measurement, we're at 28.5. So you actually could put 2 relatively tall people up front and some rear-facing infant seats behind. But in the cargo area, back here we have what is more of a cargo slot than a cargo area if you have this cargo cover installed. And this is a peculiar cargo cover because of how small it is. If we pull this off the vehicle, this is a hard part. There's really nowhere to tuck that away. And then it is attached to the head restraints in the back by this little flappy fabric part because of how dramatically these rear seats recline, as I showed you earlier. And I have to admit that as far as small cars go, this back seat is surprisingly comfortable. Just check out that angle of recline. My headrest would be really close to the rear glass, but importantly, I have a surprising amount of headroom going on here still. Cargo room though, there is preciously little. If I put this in a more natural position, right like that, not the most upright, not the most reclined, you could see that you could put maybe about 2 of these 22-inch roller bags back here. This is the largest size you can carry on to an American domestic flight. But there is a little bit more storage space if we go under the load floor, actually quite a bit more storage space. And if I fold these rear seats down, you'll notice that they have created this little plastic partition here to kind of bridge the gap if those front seats are scooted forward. And you might want to do that if you wanted the most cargo room possible. If we go all the way down the rabbit hole, there's even more going on. Here we have a little foam divider that would normally hold your fix-a-flat and tire inflator kit. We have a warning triangle there, and what sort of looks like a spare tire well, although that would not be large enough for a spare tire. Back in the cargo area, here's what's going on with this hard plastic bridge. If for some reason you had this slid forward and you wanted to bridge the gap between the cargo area and that seat back, you could use that to do that. Although I suspect I would probably just leave the load floor out of the vehicle the entire time because you get a lot more storage space back here. Enough room for at least 3 of these 22-inch roller bags to fit back here, perhaps even 4 if they were a little bit narrower. Now, unfortunately, this little bridge does not come off the seat, it appears. So if you do plan on using that deep storage well, and why would you not? I think I would just leave the load floor out all the time. There's nothing to do with this little flap. In fact, it kind of gets in the way, if I'm completely honest there. On the other hand, these wheels and tires are so small, I wouldn't be surprised if you could fit one of those under the load floor and stick a bag on top. Here's a better look at that sliding second row seat behind the driver. That rear passenger seat is slid all the way forward. Again, not a whole lot of room is going on there, but plenty of room over on the right side of the vehicle. We have the front passenger seat folded flat, as you can see there. We have a hard plastic backing to the seat, but nothing extra to protect the imitation leather upholstery there. Kind of an unusual interior here in that we have a completely flat floor. That's a nice touch. One USB-C charge port right there, just behind that relatively unusual driver armrest. Trust me, we're going to take a look at that now. Here's what that armrest looks like from the front. It's the only soft touch armrest in here, and the reason for the unusual mechanism is that it lifts back like that, and then it slides forward and backward with the driver's seat, as does the front cup holder arrangement. You can see that's part of the seat bottom cushion. We get two big cup holders there and kind of a phone slot, but it's all upholstered in the same upholstery as the driver and front passenger seats. Speaking of the upholstery, it again is an imitation leather design, two-tone, so your eyes are not deceiving you. And then we have a white piping section in the middle of the seat back and on that rear portion of the seat back right there as well to help dress things up. And they give that little piping strip back there to the rear seats as well. Moving over to the front doors, we find lots and lots of hard plastic. We find a height adjustable shoulder belt, interestingly for the driver and front passenger, although there's not a lot of adjustability. The door panels though, those are all hard plastic. And if there's one thing I could ask for, it would be a soft touch armrest at least for the driver. But I kind of like the style with these fake screw heads there and this sort of epoxy garage floor pattern for that little trim piece. The door handles, those are pretty easy to use, and rather surprisingly, we have two speakers in the front doors. There's actually a little tweeter up there in the A-pillar. Now moving on over to the dashboard, we find all hard plastics, as you'd expect in a vehicle with a $20,000 starting point. And then over here we have a USB-A interface port that works with CarPlay, USB-C, that's charge only, and then a 12-volt charging port right there between the two. We have a storage cubby right there across the dashboard, but nothing to keep things from sliding around, no rubbery coating or anything like that. Then we have a bin-style glove compartment, no damping, but I was able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. And speaking of 11-inch tablets, we have a just over 10-inch tablet right here in the screen, acting as the infotainment system. We have the same EV information screens we find in other Hyundai models, native mapping. We do have some climate control readouts here in the screen, but like other Hyundai models, they have not abandoned the physical buttons. Hyundai says that their customers in surveys after surveys indicate that they really, really want the physical buttons to remain. So I'm glad that they kept those. Big air vents right there between the two, the EV start-stop button right over there. And if we take a look at these buttons, you can see basically the same as the rest of the Hyundai lineup in North America. The climate controls, those are a little bit different, kind of old school in their vibe, but we have auto brake hold. We have a 360-degree camera system in this model. You can see that right up there. And we have the cameras integrated into the instrument cluster as well. So when you turn left or turn right in the top end model, we get that surround view camera readout right there, in addition to the one up front and center. Back in the center console, we have buttons for the heated and ventilated seats and a grocery bag hook on the passenger side. That's a really cool touch. And if we go in for a closer look, you can see this has kind of a fabric texture to it. It's not exactly a hard plastic. It's kind of a rubbery finish, I guess you could say. In here we have the Qi wireless charging slot, and then down there at the bottom we have a 1.6 kilowatt inverter output. And you can see that we have almost a flat floor. It's flat in the back, but up front we have a little bit of a bump, likely for some battery connectors and battery cables. Going back over to the driver's side, we have kind of an old school, or maybe previous generation, I guess you could say, format for the instrument cluster. So it sits on top of the dashboard kind of like a tablet, but it's not exactly like that. It's kind of more triangular there, so it just integrates relatively nicely. It's not running the latest software that we find in other Hyundai models, but I think it actually looks pretty decent as well. The 4-dot design is something that we're seeing in a lot of new Hyundai models. It's H in Morse code, if you're wondering where that design comes from. No soft touch airbag cover or anything like that, but we do have a wrapped steering wheel, and this is heated as well. On this side, we find the controls for the adaptive cruise control and the aggressive lane centering software. A drive mode button that cycles us through those various drive modes there. None of them will make this car any faster though. Over here we find infotainment buttons, and we have a tilt telescopic steering column. Also borrowed from some of the other Hyundai EVs, we have the same sort of shifter there that we find in the Ioniq 5, with park being the button on the end, and their updated turn signal stalks as well. To the left of the steering column, that's where we find the headlight adjustment dial in this model. We then have the heated steering wheel button and the electric parking brake. Here's a closer look at the driver's side door for one correction. All 4 doors actually have this soft touch insert, but it's not a soft touch armrest. So over there where you'd want to put your elbow, it's not soft, but the face of this does have a bit of a soft touch feel to it. Up on the ceiling, we don't have the most high quality materials as you'd expect, but we do have a fabric headliner there, the SOS button for the telematics system, and we have slide to the side sun visors with vanity mirrors, something honestly I hadn't expected. Okay, gotta get my wallet out. With the parking situation figured out, it's time to get the Casper Electric out on the road. If I am a tiny bit distracted on camera, it's because I'm trying to pay attention to where I'm going and listen to the nav system and, of course, talk to all of you at the same time. Now, Hyundai says this will go 0 to 60 in 10.5 seconds. In my testing, they are absolutely correct, 10.5 seconds. Remember, there's not a lot of power going on here. I'm not going to be speeding because there are lots of speed cameras, but if I floor it, you know, acceleration is, shall we say, glacial. The 60 to 0 stopping distance, that was pretty decent actually, just 118 feet, even though it is pretty cold out here. Right now it's dropped down to about 3 degrees Celsius, so just barely above freezing, certainly not warm. Where the Casper really shines though is in its ease to park. It's very small. It actually feels peppier than those numbers would otherwise indicate, and again, Hyundai has brought a lot of the same features from their larger and more expensive EVs right down here to the Casper. So for instance, I have the regenerative braking paddles on the back of the steering wheel. So if I want to command pretty aggressive braking regen, I can do that with the paddles. If I want to just coast, I can do that as well. If we slip into traffic here, we can activate the highway driving assistance system, which is Hyundai speak for adaptive cruise control with aggressive lane centering. This is not hands off the wheel steering like we find, of course, in Ford's Blue Cruise or the GM Super Cruise system, but it does a pretty decent job of helping keep you centered in the lane. And of course, here in South Korea, it will also take off again. It doesn't require that you hit a button to actually start moving again out on the highway like we're on. Acceleration clearly is going to be a lot better in, I don't know, practically everything, although a Fiat 500e is not exactly exciting. But the stopping distance and the handling capabilities of the Casper are pretty good. And that has to do with the relatively light curb weight and the low center of gravity, of course, thanks to that low-centered battery pack. Unusually, especially for an EV in North America, the suspension here is really quite soft also. So this is one of the more comfortable small vehicles, period, that I've driven in quite some time. Not just electric vehicles, just generally speaking. While we're stuck in traffic, let me digress for just one moment and talk about why we're probably not going to get the Casper in North America, as much as I might like to see it, just like I might like to see that Kia EV3 right over there in the lane next to us. First thing is obviously that it's a little on the small side. The second thing is they don't need to bring a loss leader electric compliance car to America, like for instance Fiat needs to with the 500e. The 500e has to exist because they need ZEV credits and CAFE credits to offset the big Ram trucks that they sell. Hyundai doesn't have any big trucks. Hyundai also has one of the better selling electric cars already in the United States with the Ioniq 5, and they have the upcoming Ioniq 9, their 3-row vehicle, and they've got 3 Genesis EVs in the United States as well. And they're pushing really hard with plug-in hybrids on top of that. So they simply don't need the credit offsets that we find with some car companies, most notably Stellantis. And personally, I think that's a pity because I think this would fit relatively well in the United States. The suspension is comfortable, it soaks up freeway expansion joints like this really nicely. For a small vehicle like this, I absolutely give ride quality an A. You really won't find a small vehicle like this with a suspension that is this comfortable. This is significantly more comfortable than something like the Fiat 500e, and it doesn't have as much of that bobble-headed feel that you typically find in small cars because the suspension is relatively soft, and that's kind of the surprising thing. Now that we're in this dark tunnel, it's probably a good time to talk about cabin noise because you can definitely hear that the glass is not sound insulating, but we don't get a lot of road noise in here. They've actually done a really good job with that. Over expansion joints and potholes, you definitely hear the tires going over things, but they've done a good job with the aerodynamics of the vehicle to make sure that wind noise and generally speaking road noise are pretty well controlled. This is also pretty darn efficient. I've been averaging 4.1 miles per kilowatt hour, admittedly not driving very quickly here in Korea, but that's a pretty respectable score, especially considering we have the heater on and it's been averaging about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius outside, so just barely above freezing. At its core, the Casper is a city car. It's designed to live in urban environments like this, whether you live in an urban area or you live in suburbia and you commute to an urban core like Seoul. But what's interesting about this that's different than other city cars we find around the world, all those tiny little cars in Europe, etc., is that this has a more North American vibe to it. The steering wheel is normally sized. Yes, the steering is relatively quick and it's easy to park this into tight parking spots, but the way the suspension is tuned, the way the steering wheel is even shaped, just feels more suitable for North America. And that's probably not by accident, because if you have noticed out here in Seoul, these roadways are sized more like North American roadways, certainly than London or Paris. We have wide lanes, we have relatively low speed limits, admittedly, but the sight lines, the way things are structured here roadway-wise, and the way the vehicles on the road tend to be sized, is very North American normative. And that's part of why I think this would work relatively well in the United States. Admittedly, small audience, but those that might be interested would find, I think, that this fits them and their personality and American roadways, etc. better than a lot of the other small cars that are also on sale in the US. So what do you all think? Should Hyundai throw caution to the wind and bring the Inster, aka the Casper Electric, to North America? Bearing in mind that this has an MSRP starting of around $20,500, depending on the country it's currently sold in. If it came to the United States, they could probably offer it for around $21,000 for the base model with 95 horsepower, maybe about 150 miles of range, something like that. That may not sound impressive, but think about what else is $20,000 in the United States, even $21,000. We're talking Nissan Versa, Mitsubishi Mirage. This is significantly better than either of those options. Admittedly, I have been driving the 115 horsepower peppier version with the bigger battery pack and more range, so this is probably somewhere around $30,000, but I think it's still a screaming deal. And they could call it a Casper and have those friendly ghost advertisements that I think would be hilarious. The bigger deal, though, is that this does not scream compliance car. It does not scream cheap car. No, it does not feel expensive inside, but Hyundai made enough changes to jam the electric drivetrain underneath that this doesn't scream of converted EV. They could very easily have deleted the big cargo well and jammed some extra batteries or whatever back there. They could have chosen not to alter the floor pan as much and made it a more compromised vehicle, and they did not. Instead, they decided that this really should be a worthwhile city EV. If you live in an area where you're simply looking for something easy to park, you want electric transportation because it's going to be more reliable long-term, it's going to be cheaper long-term, etc., I think there's a big place for this. Also, just affordable transportation, period. If you're looking for something to get you from A to B and you don't have longer than the average daily commute in America, this would definitely fit in that bill, and it would be so incredibly affordable. Sadly, though, there does not seem to be a plan for this in North America. I hope that changes, though. Let me know what you all think down there, and would you buy one of these over, I don't know, anything under $25,000? Something like a Versa, a Mirage. I mean, there aren't very many under $25,000 cars in America. What do you think about this versus a Chevy Trax, something like that? There's really so little competition. I think Hyundai could make a killing and really bring back affordable transport if they gave it a try.